You're watching Saturday Anime on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Hey now, this is Reverend Paul, and this is Raw, and it has been a while since we have talked about Angel of Darkness, and I figure today is as good of a day as any to continue that discussion. But before we do that, I just wanted to mention that I've been doing Fan Art Fridays, and every Friday I've been posting new fan art. I did some Power fan art, I did some Terry Bogard fan art, I did some Deadpool fan art. I took a break for a little while, just like I took a break from uploading videos, but I am going to be uploading more artwork, and if you'd like to check out the stuff I'm uploading, make sure to follow me on Blue Sky or Instagram or Threads or Twitter or whatever. So now that that is out of the way, let's get rambling, shall we? So Angel of Darkness 2, otherwise known as Studiochojin ni, was released in 1994, and it was directed by Suzunari Joban and Kanenari Tokiwa. Kanenari Tokiwa was a director on the Demon Beast OVA series, which is another cool hentai series. Angel of Darkness 2 starts with this chick Haruka, and she is being chased by this monstrous plant that is trying to attack her. And as that plant is doing some horrible things, Haruka notices that there is a figure watching on, and then this figure unzips his pants and whips out his junk, and just as he's about to shove his junk down Haruka's throat, that is when she wakes up. So it turns out all of that was a dream, or was it? So Haruka, she's your typical schoolgirl in a hentai. She's going to class. She's got a boyfriend named Kazuya. She's got a best friend named Deiko who's in the kendo club. Haruka is also studying natural sciences. Specifically, she is studying plants, and she has two teachers. One of her teachers is Professor Anzai, who's a pretty cool, hot teacher. She has another teacher, Professor Shimazaki. Now, Professor Shimazaki looks suspiciously like Professor Goda from Angel of Darkness Part 1. And for the longest time, I thought these were the two same fucking people. I mean, like, for years I thought this. And then one day I was watching this anime, and then someone called him Shimazaki, and I was like, oh wait, this is a different dude. Maybe a better way to put it is that he has a different name, but he's basically Professor Goda. I guess Shimazaki is a little bit different than Professor Goda. Shimazaki has a different hairstyle, and he has this hunched over posture, which I guess is unique. So Haruka and Deiko are in Shimazaki's class, and Shimazaki is giving one of his boring plant lectures, as he tends to do. And Haruka is passed out because she's having these crazy tentacle dreams all night. So Shimazaki notices this, and Deiko elbows Haruka to be like, hey, the teacher's looking at you. So Haruka freaks out, and she stands up, and Shimazaki's like, what the fuck is going on? And Haruka is like, sorry. And then Shimazaki's like, well, for disturbing my class, you and Deiko are gonna have to stay after and, clean up this bullshit that I do. So Haruka and Deiko, they have to stay in Shimazaki's class, and they got to clean up all of the bullshit that he does. And Deiko is telling Haruka that Shimazaki has this weird secret laboratory underneath the school, which sounds a lot like Professor Goda's anime sex dungeon. And Haruka is like, man, that's really weird. So eventually Deiko is like, you want to know what, Haruka? All this bullshit is your problem. I have kendo practice to go to, so please excuse me while I go do some kendoing. And Haruka is alone in this weird fucking creepy classroom office. I don't know what the fuck this is. And if that is not bad enough, Haruka is freaked out by this skeleton, which it turns out is just Kazuya playing a joke, and Haruka passes out. So Kazuya takes Haruka and he lays her down on this counter here. And then Kazuya, he feels really bad, and he tells Haruka, you want to know what, Haruka? I feel bad, so I'm going to apologize to you by giving you some sweet action. He whips out those titties. What I like about this sex scene is that there's a lot of focus on boobs. Kazuya is making sure those titties are getting the attention they deserve. There's a lot of squeezing and licking going on. Good titty action. Now, what these two lovebirds don't know is that one of Professor Shimazaki's creepy plants is watching them fuck, and it is psychically transmitting this information to the creepy plants that are in Professor Shimazaki's lab. And yes, this does confirm that Professor Shimazaki does in fact have a secret lab. So Shimazaki is hanging out in his secret lab, and then this unsuspecting chick comes down to give him reports. Now, it is at that moment Shimazaki grabs this woman and then subdues her. He ties her up to what looks like a bed on its side, and then one of his giant creepy sex plants comes out. And the reason we know this is a sequel to Angel of Darkness, just like the first Angel of Darkness, this is a plant that feeds on pussy juice. So Professor Shimazaki has this poor chick strapped to this contraption, Then he starts cranking this handle that puts her in prime tentacle position. This crazy, horny Audrey 2 plant starts attacking this chick, and Professor Shimazaki is filming it all. This poor chick is consumed by tentacles. These tentacles cover her body, they get her in the crotch, they get her in the boobs, they get her in the mouth. This chick is not having a good time. And to make things even worse, a giant dick comes out of this evil plant. Another thing that's worth pointing out, Angel of Darkness 2 is a proper tentacle hentai. Angel of Darkness 1 was more of like an S&M bondage thing, but here in Angel of Darkness 2, we have full-on tentacle action. So after Shimazaki is done feeding his plant, he hypnotizes this chick to be like, you don't remember any of this and none of this ever happened. And she's like, yep, this is totally working on me. And so her mind gets erased and she leaves. Elsewhere, Haruka is asleep and she's having another crazy dream where she is being tentacle raped by plants. This time she notices that the mysterious figure watching is Shimazaki. And then Haruka wakes up and she's all freaked out, like, what the hell does this mean? Back at Shimazaki's lab, he looks at the plant and notices like, wow, this pussy juice really invigorated this plant because it got really big and really strong. And he's like, man, this is awesome. Let me go grab a beer to celebrate. And then the plant shoots these seeds into Shimazaki's body, and then Shimazaki passes out. And then the next morning, Shimazaki has been possessed by this crazy sex plant. Shimazaki is lucky because he just got attacked by those seeds. We all remember in Angel of Darkness 1, Professor Goda was viciously tentacle raped. To be fair, we never actually saw him get tentacle raped, but I mean, look at the way my man is walking. That is the walk of a dude who spent all night getting every single one of his holes plugged. Now the next day, Haruka, Deiko, and Kazuya, they're in Professor Anzai's class, and Haruka is all spaced out, her mind is someplace else, and Deiko is asking Haruka, like, what's going on? Why are you so freaked out? And Kazuya's like, well, it's probably because on this very desk we made sweet love. Haruka's like, hey, don't say that, and she gets all freaked out, and then she takes a bunch of chemicals and she mixes them into a vial, and then she takes that vial and she pours it on the plant, and that vial kills the fuck out of this plant. And so Haruka, Deiko, and Kazuya, they go into Professor Anzai's office, and Professor Anzai's like, what the fuck happened to this plant? Haruka's like, we have no idea. And Professor Anzai's like, Haruka, this concoction that you made is so fucked up, it needs future study. So Professor Anzai takes the chemicals and she puts them in a safe in her office. Now later on in the day, Professor Anzai brings the dead plant to Professor Shimazaki, and she's like, Professor Shimazaki, do you think you could fix this dead plant? And Professor Shimazaki's like, yup, I could do that. Please come with me. So Professor Anzai follows Professor Shimazaki into his secret lab. For a secret lab, everybody but Haruka seems to know this thing exists. So once Professor Shimazaki and Professor Anzai are alone in his lab, Professor Anzai is attacked by Professor Shimazaki's tentacle plants. And she's like, Professor Shimazaki, please help me. And then Professor Shimazaki's like, you stupid bitch, the reason I brought you here was to feed your pussy juice to these plants. And Professor Anzai's like, oh man, that's really fucked up. Now Professor Shimazaki, he is bummed out that he didn't get any sweet action with the last chick. So Professor Shimazaki decides that before he feeds Professor Anzai to the carnivorous sex plant, he's got to get in some action as well. So he stuffs his face in her crotch and he starts like going to town, and his teeth, they're like doing this weird like piano key thing on her snatch. I don't know, it's very strange. And then the sex plant is like, oh man, I got to get in on this. And then he starts attacking Professor Anzai from the front. And then Shimazaki's like, well, since you got the front, then the back is all mine. Needless to say, things are not going well for Professor Anzai, but things are going well for people who enjoy human on plant tentacle action. Now, what I have not yet mentioned, because Haruka keeps having these weird sex dreams about Professor Shimazaki and these crazy plants, she decided to sneak into Shimazaki's secret lab, and she witnesses Shimazaki's assault on Professor Anzai. And Haruka is like, oh man, this is really fucked up. Let me get the fuck out of here. So Haruka goes to Kazuya and she tells him Professor Anzai is being viciously tentacle raped by Professor Shimazaki. And Kazuya's like, that is the craziest shit I have ever heard. And then Kazuya's like, hey, isn't that Professor Anzai over there? And then Haruka turns around and sees Professor Anzai. And Professor Anzai's like, hey Haruka, I'm doing fine. Now Haruka is really weirded out by all of this and she's very confused, and she realizes that Kazuya doesn't believe her. So she goes to Deiko and she says, you gotta come with me to investigate Professor Shimazaki's secret lab because he's doing crazy sex experiments. And Deiko's like, yeah, we totally should check that out. Kazuya, because he didn't believe Haruka, he decides to go back to his profession, which is peeping on chicks and taking pictures of them. So he's hanging outside the girls' bathroom. What I have failed to mention is Kazuya is part of the photography club. And as a way to make extra money, he sneakily takes pictures of chicks and then he sells them them to his fellow students. So Kazuya is not just being a pervert when he watches these chicks, he is also conducting a business exercise. And as we all know, if it's done for business, it's gotta be right. Suddenly, Professor Shimazaki comes and he crashes this shower party and he starts attacking these poor schoolgirls. Then Shimazaki notices Kazuya is watching and then he attacks Kazuya. Now, Deiko and Haruka, they go down to Shimazaki's secret lab, and Professor Shimazaki has wasted no time in attacking all of the chicks from the shower. And his creepy little Audrey 2 plant has now evolved into this monstrous octopus sex plant. And this evil plant is using its tentacles to feed on all these innocent chicks. So Deiko tries to attack Shimazaki with her kendo stick, but it proves to be useless. And then Shimazaki reveals he actually has a bunch of tentacle dicks. A lot of people are impressed by sharks, because everybody knows sharks have 2 penises. But Professor Shimazaki has like 6 of them or something like that. And he could use them to grab stuff like unsuspecting chicks, like Deiko. And Deiko is consumed by Professor Shimazaki's tentacles and he rips off her clothes. And then Deiko's boobs do that bouncy titty drop thing. Then Shimazaki opens up his lab coat and more tentacles restrain Deiko. Shimazaki grabs Deiko and then slips her the tongue in order to give her one of his patented hypno kisses. And then it's at that moment Haruka is then chloroformed by Professor Anzai, who we could deduce has been hypnotized by Professor Shimazaki and his evil plant. Haruka passes out, and then when she wakes up, she finds that she has been restrained and Professor Shimazaki is watching her. Haruka is also being watched by the giant plant that has its proboscis erect or something. And Professor Shimazaki has dressed Deiko in this cape with nothing else on, and you know that is not a good sign, because as we've seen in the movie Sorceress with Julie Strain, and as we've seen in Heavy Metal, anytime there's a naked chick just wearing a cape, she's up to some no good shenanigans. Now Professor Shimazaki, he rips open Haruka's shirt, and then Deiko starts attacking Haruka's boobs, and then she starts to move further down south. Then Professor Anzai gets in on the action. Now for some reason the carnivorous sex plant, which previously had its proboscis extended, has rescinded it and is now extending it yet again so it could now fully attack Haruka with its tentacles. So the evil plant starts feeding on Haruka and wrapping her up in its tentacles, and Professor Anzai and Deiko are servicing Professor Shimazaki's tree penises. We are in full tentacle mode. I like that we get to see Haruka here in the classic tentacle pose. The artwork with Professor Anzai and Deiko and the tree dicks is very cool too. I like that heavy use of black, which is kind of obscuring the rest of Shimazaki's anatomy. Elsewhere, we discovered Kazuya is still alive, which seems like a gross oversight on the part of Professor Shimazaki. I mean, why would he leave this dude alive? He's only going to come back and foil his schemes. I am convinced the reason Professor Shimazaki did not kill Kazuya is because Professor Shimazaki is very homophobic, and if he killed Kazuya, he was afraid people were going to be like, did you hear what happened to Kazuya? Professor Shimazaki took his many tentacle dicks and plugged up Kazuya's holes so much that motherfucker exploded. So Kazuya peeks through the window of this secret lab. I mean, really, if your lab has a fucking window, it cannot be considered a secret. When Kazuya looks through the lab window, he sees the crazy plant sex orgy that is going on, and needless to say, he is taken aback. But luckily, Kazuya is not too freaked out because he remembers that fucking concoction that Haruka made and that's in Professor Anzai's safe. So he runs upstairs and he gets the concoction of chemicals. As Kazuya is trying to get the vial of chemicals, Professor Shimazaki has grown tired of having his way with Deiko and Professor Anzai, and now he is ready to take on Haruka. Shimazaki gets so horny that his glasses explode and then he starts to like sprout these weird like plant tumor things on his body. But it is at that moment Kazuya barges in on Shimazaki's plant orgy, and Shimazaki's like, you stupid bitch, there's nothing you could do to stop me. And Kazuya's like, fuck you, and he throws that weird batch of chemicals onto the giant plant. And that chemical shrivels up that giant plant dick that's hanging from the ceiling, and all these anime sex plants die. And Haruka is like, oh my god, I'm so glad I'm safe, let me go check on Deiko. And as Haruka is checking on Deiko, Shimazaki comes up and he grabs Kazuya. And Kazuya tells Haruka she's gotta get the fuck out of there. So Haruka runs. And like any chick in a slasher movie, she does the sensible thing, running higher up the building till she gets to the roof, and there's no discernible exit. Then Professor Shimazaki shows up and he is ready to finish Haruka off because he is very, very frustrated. He is trying to get it on and he keeps getting interrupted. So his face like opens up like one of those monsters from The Strain, and then this dick comes out of his mouth and it's like flopping around, and then he's gonna like attack Haruka go with it. But once again, we find out that Kazuya is still alive. Professor Shimazaki had a second time to kill this dude, and he left him alive again. This is why it never pays to be homophobic. And so Kazuya pushes Professor Shimazaki off the building, and he grabs and saves Haruka, and Shimazaki falls and he dies just like Radu in Subspecies 3. Angel of Darkness 2 to me feels like a lateral move from Angel of Darkness 1. It doesn't really feel better or worse to me, it's just kind of Angel of Darkness 1 with tentacles. It's kind of like when Jim Wynorski would do those movies, House on Hooter Hill or The Witches of Brestwick or whatever, where it was the same fucking movie just with different actresses. You would see the same damn Trans Am in all these damn movies. They do it in JAV too, where they'll have Hitomi Tanaka as like the wife's big boob sister that's secretly tempting the husband, and then the husband eventually bangs the big boob sister in front of his wife. They'll just take that movie and then do it again with Kaho Shibuya or the underrated Asashi Mizuno. It would have been better to make Professor Shimazaki Professor Goda, who just survived the events of Angel of Darkness 1, because making him a different character just raises a lot of questions. In Angel of Darkness 1, Professor Goda was studying the sex plants because he was possessed by the Dark Elemental. Angel of Darkness 2 never provides any information as to why Shimazaki is studying these carnivorous sex plants. He just is. I get he's a botany teacher, but does he think these pussy juice eating plants will cure world hunger? Because you want to know what? I can go down for a peach from a pussy juice plant. Why not? Or maybe Professor Shimazaki is trying to get into the air freshener business. Maybe he thinks these pussy juice eating plants will make great air fresheners and finally Sprunt will become a reality. You have to make up your own explanation why he's studying these plants because the film does not provide you with one. The Dark Elemental and the fairy people and the horny little dwarves in the first Angel of Darkness added more lore to the narrative, and in that regard made the first movie more interesting. I still would recommend Angel of Darkness 2 because I do like that it is focusing more on tentacles than the first film. I like that there's a lot of focus on boobs, as I mentioned earlier, and I do like Professor Shimazaki because he does return in Angel of Darkness 3, and I think ultimately he does become a better villain than Professor Goda.